So I was thinking, how can I help people who watch these videos or listen to them understand the world better with a simple formula, we'll say, with a simple set of understandings? And I think I have figured that out. I think the single most important thing that people are missing that will work no matter, we'll say, how poor your system is for understanding the world, that one thing that will make it better is this concept of momentum. So, how should we understand momentum and why is this important? What I think I want to do is outline what momentum looks like, we'll say, in the physical or material world, so that you can get a sense for how this momentum thing operates. And so when we're talking about momentum, momentum is not a function of mass. Right? It's not the mass of the object, because an object at rest stays at rest and it has no momentum, irrespective of how little or how much mass it has. And so mass alone doesn't explain it. It's this ratio of mass to energy, roughly speaking, subtracting out resistance and all this crazy nonsense. And usually we oversimplify that and we say, oh, it's just the amount of energy put into the system, the mass of the system, and the resistance. There's more to it than that, but it's not that important. What's important is that you kind of get the concept, right? And the mass affects things because once you've put the energy in to move a large mass, that energy makes it harder to stop the mass. And this does not proceed linearly. It's actually exponential. And so when you put enough energy in past a certain point, you pass this like tipping point, however you want to think about it. And then the thing will keep moving for quite a while before it stops. And for smaller objects, the advantage is less energy is required. So especially smaller objects, shorter distances. So there's always a loss of energy on the first movement, right? So something's at rest. When you first start to move it, this is a problem. They use principles like this in things like elevators all the time. So there's weights in an elevator that counterbalance the weight of the elevator itself plus the expected number of people in it. And then that way, when you move things, the momentum required or the energy required to get the momentum started, right, is less. So the momentum changes based on the fact that you're dealing with a much larger mass system in total, but that mass is balanced out by a counterweight. And that's going to be an important concept to understanding the world, because I'm going to take this away from the physical, the material, and into something hopefully a bit more useful. It's not that the physical isn't useful, it's probably more useful, but we're stuck on the internet, so we're going to work with what we got. So when you start thinking about how objects move based on the amount of energy put in and the amount of momentum they have and how that momentum works, you can realize there's some good things about momentum. Things will keep going even when you're not still putting energy in. In fact, you can take some energy out and some of that momentum will stay. That's what flywheels do, for example. And if you want to look that up, you should look up YouTube videos or whatever of flywheels in action. They're quite fascinating. That weight, once you get it rolling, will keep going and you can remove electricity from it. They use this on the electric grid now. They use spinning flywheels and they cut over to them when they need power, and that momentum gets used up and converted into electricity. It's a kind of a cool system. If you don't know about it, and you probably don't, it's worth looking into. It's kind of fun. It's a fun little rabbit hole to explore. So momentum gets used a number of ways in the physical world to do things like make sure there's power on all the time and to get you up and down a tall building very quickly and very efficiently using very little energy, because you're taking the momentum on one side and the momentum on the other side, balancing them out, and only having to put energy in for the difference rather than having to put in enough energy to do all the work. with the motor initially. And understanding this is really difficult unless you think about it, right? Unless you do some experiments, watch some YouTube videos, whatever you got to do. But now, how does this play into sort of the models that we're using for the world? Well, it does map onto things like groups and status and inertia. In terms of, you have a political movement, it has inertia. And the change of those things, right? Things like novelty and story momentum or narrative, they'd probably call it narrative momentum. I don't like that term used, we'll say that way. See this video for why. I have a better definition. One way to think about this is the momentum that you have, we'll say as a single person, is you can just start going to the gym tomorrow. It's not a big deal. But how long does it take a company to change a product design? You can change your fashion by going to the store. A company can't do that. There's a lot of people involved. There's a lot of inertia around what you're doing today. You've got these settled procedures. Nobody wants to change their procedures, even if it's just instead of buying blue, we have to buy red. That's just a lot of work. The more changes you make, the more likely they are to fail, because the more errors build up in a system, the more changes you're making. So larger systems, including political systems, more opportunity for error. You should be careful with your change, because once things start changing, lots of things can change without your control and the errors build up. So when you have a group of people and they start getting together and they do something like a book club, we just recently finished our language recreation book club, that has some momentum to it. There's every Saturday we get up, read a piece of the book, we get online, we talk about the book, right? We have the momentum going, so we kept going afterwards, after the camera stopped rolling, if you will. And now that that's gone, I have my Saturdays back, right? But there was a momentum behind that process, behind doing that every day, and it will be missed because I've got to fill that time with something else now, even though I wanted that time back the whole time it was being used, right? And so there's an inertia behind, which is part of the momentum. There's inertia behind all that changes the nature of your interaction with it. And that group of people that used to meet in that forum to do those things is now going to disperse. That energy is going to go elsewhere. And then there's still a momentum, we'll say, behind having read the book together, having experienced it together, right? What we're going to integrate. And then hopefully we're going to do a video just, maybe in a month or something, talking about our experience and what the book club did for us. Because there's momentum from having engaged in the process of the book club for 10 months, I think is what we ended up with, 40 sessions. Weird that it ended up at 40. And that's momentum. Now, the momentum of our small book club, where we had, 6 people at most in any given book club, is not the same as the momentum of a political movement or a political party, which is smaller than the momentum of, we'll say, an ideological movement, because an ideological movement may spread much further and affect political parties in different ways. They may add to the momentum of the political party, or they may subtract from it. And that is an interesting way to think about what's going on. In general, you can't just turn the ship instantly. You can't just come into office and say, okay, well, from now on, the Republican Party is going to be called the Conservative Party of Donkeys. You can't do that. It won't work, most likely. There are exceptions to this rule because the missing part of momentum is energy. This is the part no one talks about, because it's basically invisible and hard to sort of understand. How do you impart energy into a group? So it's easy for you to engage with, a motivational speaker, we'll say, and go to the gym. You start listening to a podcast and you're like, aha, I can just go to the gym and I'll be a better person. And then it's very easy for you as a single person to go ahead and start going to the gym. Now, the problem with that is it's hard for you to keep going to the gym on your own. The trade-off might be, well, I'll try to get my friends to go to the gym with me. And I actually did this at one point. And so there were 4 of us all going to the gym together. It made it easier to go to the gym because those people are relying on you to be there. And you're all there together. And there's a camaraderie. It has more momentum than you going to the gym by yourself. So it's easier to keep it up. It's better for you, effectively. It helps boost your motivation. But the trade-off is it's way harder to get 4 people organized on a day and date to go to the gym. Now, sometimes you get lucky, and this turns out to not be a problem. But generally speaking, getting more than yourself to do anything is harder than getting yourself to do a thing. For certain things. For other things, that's not true. Why? Because there's an inborn momentum. And so where your energy is pointed matters a lot. So if your energy is pointed at getting better, and you hear somebody motivate you to go to the gym, that energy is pointed to going to the gym, bang. The novelty of going to the gym to get better, which you haven't tried before, becomes able to force you into the gym. And it's easy for you to go to the gym by yourself, right? Because you don't have to coordinate with other people. You don't have to convince them which gym to go to, what day of the week, what time, all that stuff. And so it's just easier. That's how momentum is. Now, again, you have less momentum. So if you're there by yourself and you don't make friends real quick, right? So once you start to see how momentum will work at different scales and what the trade-offs are, because there are always trade-offs, you can start to understand. A political movement might be started by a charismatic individual, somebody with a lot of energy. That's not necessarily bad. Charisma is not optional. Some people have it, some people don't. And so you better account for it in your worldview, which almost no one is right now because of the myth of World War II. You can check out this video here for more on that. So what that means is that a charismatic person takes their energy, puts it hopefully directed enough towards a goal. Their message is novel enough to attract people. They put their energy into it, and the momentum, the movement starts. Well, the problem with movements is that if the energy is not directed but gets dispersed, the movement dissipates. This happened with Occupy Wall Street. Why did Occupy Wall Street kind of fizzle out? Because they didn't have a goal. They were directed towards doing something, but they weren't directed towards doing any particular thing. And so there was a lot of ability there. There was a lot of potential there. There was a lot of energy there. There was a lot of movement there, but there was no momentum to do any particular thing. And that's why when they got on TV and people asked the leaders, or at least the spokes leaders, what do you want? They didn't have an answer. A couple of them were like, well, we want jobs. Well, Wall Street just gave them jobs. Sure, here you go. You want jobs? There you go. You get jobs. Is that what the movement wanted, or is that what that person wanted? Can't give everybody jobs. So you can see that momentum matters and that it's often confused with movement. Movement is not necessarily momentum. All movement has a momentum, but if you're not looking at the momentum of the movement, you're not understanding what's going on. And right now we're living in the land of novelty. So what's happening is all these people are coming up with these new logical systems for understanding some aspect of the world. And maybe it may be for understanding your enemies better. Or maybe it might be for understanding how we can cooperate together, right? If we all just agree to this framework, we have a way to cooperate. We have not only a common enemy, but we have common tools to use against that enemy. This creates some form of momentum. Now, how directed it is depends on a lot of things, and how it dissipates depends on a lot of things. If your enemy has been misidentified, or if your framework is not sufficient, the momentum in your movement will fizzle out. Or worse yet, you'll hit a wall and it will break apart. And then all those people that you've gathered in your little movement will scatter. And maybe they'll go off and try to fix the system that they initially thought worked by creating their own sort of very similar system, right? And starting all over again. And that is kind of what we're seeing now. Seeing a bunch of people with a bunch of systems. They've gotten some groups together. Some of them are fairly large, or at least seem to be fairly large. They're not large by any reasonable set of numbers. I know Jordan Peterson talks about, wow, the first time I saw 1 million followers. 2 billion accounts on the internet. 1 million's really not that much. It is to him. And it would be to me, right? That's not the issue. The issue is the momentum of the internet is so great that 1 million followers doesn't move the needle. Now, it may seem to move the needle if you're sitting in your little bubble, and you have to be sitting in a little bubble, right? But that doesn't mean that it's moving the needle outside of your bubble. So you need to be able to assess the momentum of the thing that you're involved in to see where it's going. That will tell you possibly how long it's lasting or will last, and also what its effects are, right? Because you can see the effects of momentum. If you gather too much momentum, you won't be able to stop in time. So something like that can be seen in a war, right? You've got this momentum of your troops, and they're just conquering cities and moving on, and conquering cities and moving on, conquering cities and moving on. And then you get to the last city, we'll say the capital city. And then what happens is they destroy the place because they have all this built up momentum in what they're doing. That's a good way to think about it. Is this a scientifically precise and accurate way to think about it? Perhaps not. But I'm not here to give you a scientifically precise and accurate way to think about things. I could do that. That's kind of boring and easy, though, and lots of other people are doing that. I don't like those people, so I'm not going to copy that or mimic that particular pattern. I'm here to show you patterns, not to lock you into scientifically sound ways of understanding the world, because I don't think those exist, among other things. You will see the momentum of those sorts of things crashing all over the place, either crashing into each other, bang, two ideas. They've got, we'll say, followers that are actually in both camps, sort of cross over, and then those ideas collide, boom, and they can't be part of both groups anymore, and now they both lose momentum. Typically, not always, because momentum is tricky. The world is huge, right? We're not talking about one object in one space all by itself, right, with only simple rules. But once you start to think of things in terms of momentum, and maybe grab a weight, tie it to a string, swing it around, feel what happens, try to stop it, right? Learn to use nunchucks. I never learned to use nunchucks well, but that'll teach you about momentum real quick, because you'll bash yourself in the head a few times and go, ow, or whack yourself across the back, ow, right? Or hit your arms, ow. It all hurts, trust me, especially when you get that going. If you've ever seen anybody use nunchucks and use that momentum to do fight scenes in particular, Bruce Lee does an excellent job at this, by the way. Of course, watch all his movies, they're awesome. You'll understand the majesty and the power of momentum. And you can start to apply that to movements of people and groups of people and realize exactly what's going on there. And it doesn't really matter if you're listening to the Curtis Yarvins of the world or the Jordan Petersons of the world or whoever else. You can start to actually look at their body of work, at what's happening around them, and understand what might happen next and why things are going on. It might be a good hint, too, to see when things go too far, for example, when things change in relation to how they used to be. Right? So a lot of times you'll have somebody sort of leading a movement or gathering people together, right, in some kind of a system. And what ends up happening is that person suddenly changes their tactics. Usually, this is a sign that something is very, very wrong, that whatever framework they're using is past its usefulness. So if in the beginning they start to have debates with people, they go on, they talk about their ideas, They find people who sort of disagree with them. They start to debate those people. And then one day they stop the debates and they write a book. That's a red flag. I'm not saying it's bad. It might not be bad. It might be fine. But usually it's a red flag because your tactics have changed. And the question is, well, why did you change your tactics? Now, if you have a big enough system that's correct enough, this isn't necessarily a problem, but most people don't. And so what's happening is they're out of bullets. They're out of tools to apply in their ideology, and their ideology has run dry. And you can see this quite clearly with the idea of liberalism right now. Liberalism is over, guys. I hate to break it to you. All forms of liberalism, which are basically fundamentally based in individualism, are over. That momentum is gone. This was one of the many pieces of the myth of World War II, which contains misunderstandings, massive misunderstandings about the Enlightenment. There were 3 Enlightenment movements, for example, not one. Maybe they all happened at the same time, but they were 3 distinct Enlightenment movements. Nobody told you that. Fair enough. That myth is over. Liberalism as a concept, as the concepts will say post-World War II, it's actually pre-World War II, but we'll say post-World War II. It's an easier way to understand it. That's all breaking down, right? So the momentum associated not only with the myth of World War II, if you want to know more about that, you can check out this video, but also the momentum with the little pieces of that myth, the little assumptions that people made about how things work and how things could continue to work. That's all coming to a close. That's all crashing in on itself. That whole ideology of liberalism, because liberalism is an ideology at the end of the day, that is breaking apart. And all of the people that had little systems based on liberalism have changed tactics. And what they were doing before no longer works. They have switched what they're doing. Some of them have good momentum, by the way, so they'll be fine maybe if they can find a better worldview or system to put the momentum that they have into, turn that ship, as it were. Some of them are just going to blow up and crash into one another and crash into the wall of the fact that they're wrong. That will just dissipate the energy, right, over time. It doesn't happen instantly. And I think the biggest takeaway from momentum, especially with respect to things like the loss of liberalism as a viable frame for understanding the world, is things don't happen right away. And because of momentum, we don't realize that things come crashing down very slowly sometimes. Not all the time, sometimes. And so as that momentum winds down, there can be a lot of collateral damage in the meantime, but because it doesn't happen, we'll say, on the time frame that we expect or wish it would happen, we tend to misread that because we're very, very used in this small time frame, totally interrupted world where we keep getting more and more interruptions and our attention is being fought over by many competing forces. We tend to discount momentum and the amount of time it takes for things to dissipate. A lot of the people who have identified that things have gone awry actually identified the correct moment where things went awry, but the momentum of those movements is not going to dissipate, perhaps for some years in some cases. As with the myth of World War II, the myth of World War II is a very pervasive myth. It's been around for decades and decades and decades, right? And we're only beginning to realize that it's a myth that doesn't hold the world. The myth part isn't the problem. The problem is it's a tiny myth and it's full of things that are so wrong. They're unuseful to us over time. They're not unuseful to us in the short term. In the short term, liberalism is great because it allows you to focus on yourself, for example, right? In the short term, having a quick definition of evil, pretty good. Having a way to identify it and then say, aha, these things are always evil. That's never correct, but it's often correct enough, right? In the case of the myth of World War II, correct enough for a very long time. Not anymore. Now we're realizing other problems, right? As the result of believing this myth. And just as a teaser, because I can't do that video here, today, but I'm working on it, trying to get there. Momentum works differently at different layers of the hierarchy. And that has profound implications for everything that's going on today. What that basically says is that, we'll say, institutions or people higher up in the hierarchy have more attention. They have more directable energy available to them immediately, and they have more resources. And so what that means is that when they start something going, it takes a lot longer to stop than when you go to the gym. And so it matters who started what movement, because not all movements are equal, and you can't measure them strictly by energy. And so once you get an understanding of the hierarchy, then you add the change in momentum based on the area of the hierarchy something is moving in. That really starts to explain a bunch of stuff about how the world works. And I'm sorry, I can't lay all of that out for you. Probably be a little overwhelming anyway, but I'm working on explaining hierarchy. So at some point I will get to that. And that video should come eventually. I'm not going to make any promises. So hopefully this allows you to go back, we'll say, to the physical world, to the material world, kind of experience momentum for yourself. You take a rake and swing it around. Like, seriously, like just kind of, this non-linear sort of thing that you can add, we'll say, a seemingly self-reciprocal or virtuous cycle of energy to, where it just keeps rotating, right? Throw a stick like this and watch it rotate through the air. That exists in the realm of ideas, if you will, in the political movements, in the things that motivate the actions of people. And it works pretty much the same. Keeping in mind it's not a perfect map, but I think it's more useful than what you're used to today. Now, I'm not going to come out and call out all these people, right, that are doing these movements and how their momentum is breaking. I don't think that's useful. I don't really care what ideologies or movements or whatever you're involved in or listening to or paying attention to. I want you to think of the world more relationally, and to understand relationality, you really need to have a sense for momentum. So listen, I hope this helped you. I now have a Substack, by the way, so you can check that out. I've got a couple of articles up there. I'll put up a couple more. And I just want to thank you for the momentum of your time and attention.